Hey guys, in today's video we're going to share an incredible and breathtaking story that will leave you with goosebumps. Imagine going through a near-death experience and receiving a warning about a date that could change everything. This is exactly what happened to Evangeline Prescott. She survived a terrible accident and during her near-death experience received a frightening message about August 28, 2024. Stay with us until the end to learn all the details of this amazing story and what you should do to stop it. Get ready. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell to receive notifications, and leave a like to support our content. Let's get started. Hello, my name is Evangeline Prescott, but everyone calls me Eve. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, a city that seems to have stopped in time. Imagine cobblestone streets shaded by centuries-old oak trees covered in Spanish moss, antebellum mansions with wide porches and lush gardens, the smell of jasmine in the air, and the distant sound of Atlantic waves. This was the setting of my childhood, a place where the past and present mix in an almost magical way. I always considered myself an ordinary person, you know? She had a promising career as an architect, restoring Charleston's beautiful historic buildings. My friends were loyal and fun, always up for happy hour at the rooftop at Vondu or a picnic in Hampton Park. And what I considered most important, I had the love of my life by my side, Carter Hayes. Carter and I met in high school. He was the kind of boy everyone noticed. Tall, with shaggy blonde hair that looked like it had been combed by the beach wind, and a smile that made my heart melt. We started dating in second year and wow, we were in love. But like many high school couples, we broke up when we went to different colleges. I went to Clemson University to study architecture, while Carter went to Duke University to study engineering. Years passed. I returned to Charleston after college, determined to contribute to preserving the history of my hometown. I was focused on my career, going out occasionally but never finding anyone who made me feel the way Carter did. And then, on a sunny spring Saturday, it happened. I was at Black Tap Coffee, my favorite coffee shop on Beaufort Street, when I heard a familiar voice ordering a latte. I looked up and there he was, Carter Hayes, even more handsome than I remembered. Our eyes met and it was as if no time had passed. That old connection was still there, stronger than ever. We started talking as if we had seen each other yesterday. Carter told me he had returned to Charleston to work on a sustainable engineering project. We exchanged numbers and, well, the rest is history. We got back together and a year later on a starry night at the Battery, with the sound of waves in the background and the oak trees as witnesses, Carter got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. I said yes, of course, with tears in my eyes and my heart overflowing with happiness. Our wedding was a dream come true. An intimate ceremony at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, with our closest families and friends. I wore a vintage dress that had belonged to my grandmother, and Carter looked handsome in his navy blue suit. When we exchanged vows under a century-old oak tree, with the Ashley River as a backdrop, I felt like my life couldn't get any better. Little did I know that our time together would be so short. We decided to take a honeymoon trip to Hawaii, a place we've always dreamed of visiting. It was a wonderful 2 weeks, exploring white sand beaches, hiking through rainforests, watching the sunset at the top of the Haleakala volcano. Every moment was perfect. Every shared experience strengthened our love even more. It was upon returning from that trip that everything changed. We were returning home from the airport, tired but happy, making plans for the future. Carter drove, one hand on the steering wheel, the other holding mine. We were talking about starting a family, about the house we wanted to buy, about the dreams we wanted to make together. And then, in the blink of an eye, our world turned upside down. A speeding car ran a red light and crashed into the driver's side of our car. The impact was brutal. All I remember is the deafening sound of writhing metal, Carter's scream, and then, silence. What happened after that is something I will never forget. It's an experience that completely changed the way I see life, death, and everything in between. And that's the story I want to share with you now. A story of loss, of pain, but also of hope and a purpose greater than I could have ever imagined. The moment of impact. The moment of impact was as if the universe had stopped its breath. You know that feeling when you're dreaming and suddenly you fall? It was like that, only 1,000 times more intense and real. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity. I remember hearing the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt, Carter's muffled scream, and then the deafening crash of the collision. The shock was so violent that I felt as if every molecule in my body had been shaken. The airbag exploded in front of me with a force that knocked all the air out of my lungs. And then, in an instant, it was as if I had been ripped from my body. Suddenly, I was no longer strapped into the passenger seat. It was like I was floating above the car, looking down. The scene below me was surreal, as if I was watching a movie in slow motion. The car was completely destroyed on the driver's side. The twisted metal, the shattered glass, everything seemed unreal. Carter lay motionless, his head slumped over the steering wheel, a trickle of blood running from his forehead. And I could see my own body in the passenger seat. It was a horrible and fascinating sight at the same time. My body was in a strange position, as if I had been thrown against the dashboard. There was blood, a lot of blood. I could see that I was bleeding from my forehead and nose, and my left arm was at an unnatural angle. But the strangest thing of all is that I wasn't afraid. It was like I was watching a scene from a movie, not something that was actually happening to me. I felt a surreal calm, a peace that made no sense given the gravity of the situation. People started approaching the car. I could hear screams, someone calling an ambulance. A middle-aged woman with a gentle face framed by graying hair approached the passenger window. She looked at my body with horror in her eyes, her hands shaking as she tried to open the door. "Hang in there, honey," she said, her voice shaking. "Help is on the way." I wanted to tell her that I was okay, that I wasn't in pain. I wanted to ask her to help Carter. But when I tried to speak, I realized I had no voice. Or rather, there was, but no one could hear me. It was as if I were a ghost, invisible and inaudible to everyone around me. A young man, perhaps a college student, was on the phone, his voice frantic as he spoke to emergency services. "Please come quickly," he said. "It's very serious. I don't think the driver is breathing." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. Wasn't Carter breathing? No, this couldn't be happening. I tried to move toward him, desperately wanting to help in some way, but I found I couldn't move. It was as if I were trapped in that vantage point, unable to interfere. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the scene began to fade. The voices became more distant, the images more hazy. It was like I was being pulled away, to a place I didn't know. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the ambulance arriving, its lights flashing red and blue against the Charleston night sky. At that moment, suspended between two worlds, I didn't know if I was alive or dead. All I knew was that something extraordinary was happening to me, something that went beyond anything I had ever experienced before. And that was when my true journey began, a journey that would take me to the limits of existence and back, forever changing the way I saw the world and my place in it. Darkness and silence. After the accident scene disappeared, I found myself enveloped in total darkness. It wasn't scary as you might imagine. In fact, it was comforting, as if I were floating in an infinite ocean of nothingness. There was no light, there was no sound, there was no physical sensation. It was just me and the void. At first, I tried to understand where I was. I tried to move, to scream, to do something. But it was as if I no longer had a body. I was just consciousness, a thought floating in space. It's hard to explain to someone who's never been through it. It's like trying to describe colors to someone who was born blind. In that absolute silence, I began to notice things about myself that I had never noticed before. It was as if my entire life was playing before my eyes, but not like a movie. It was more like I could feel every moment, every decision, every emotion I had ever experienced. I remembered the first time I saw Carter in high school. I could feel that emotion again, that butterflies in my stomach when our eyes met for the first time in the school cafeteria. I remembered our first kiss, under the bleachers after a football game. I could taste cherry soda on his lips, the smell of freshly cut grass in the air. I relived our breakup when we went to college. The sharp pain of parting, the tears I shed alone in my dorm on the first night away from home. The letters we exchanged in the first few months full of promises of eternal love that slowly became more and more spaced out. And then, our reunion years later. The excitement of seeing him again at the coffee shop, the tremor in my hands when we exchanged phone numbers. Our first night together after so many years apart, rediscovering each other, falling in love again. But it wasn't just the big moments. I could feel every little moment. The time I helped an elderly lady cross the street on King Street, the smile of gratitude on her wrinkled face. The time I lied to a friend about liking her new haircut, the weight of the lie in my chest. The time I ignored a homeless man asking for change because I was late for a meeting, the pang of guilt I felt afterwards. And the strangest thing of all was that I wasn't just reliving my own emotions. Somehow I could feel the emotions of the people around me. I could feel my parents' happiness when I graduated from college, the pride in their hearts. I could feel the hurt of an ex-boyfriend when I broke up with him, the sharp pain of rejection. I could feel the gratitude of that elderly woman I helped cross the street, the feeling of warmth in her heart. It was as if every action I had ever taken had created a ripple, affecting not only my life but the lives of everyone around me. And now, in that silent void, I could see and feel all these waves at once. It was overwhelming and beautiful at the same time. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It could have been minutes, hours, or days. Time didn't seem to have meaning in that place. But slowly, I began to realize that I was not alone in the darkness. There was a presence there with me. Something I couldn't see or hear, but I could feel. An energy. A consciousness that seemed infinitely bigger and wiser than me. And that's when things really started to get interesting. Because this presence, this energy, began to communicate with me. Not with words, but with sensations, images, and understandings that simply appeared in my mind. It was at that moment that I began to understand that what I was experiencing was not just a review of my life. It was something much bigger, much deeper. It was a lesson, an awakening to a reality that I had never realized before. And as I floated there, in that silent yet somehow alive darkness, I felt like I was about to receive revelations that would forever change the way I saw the world, life, and myself. The point system. As I floated in that infinite darkness, I began to notice something strange and fascinating. It was as if every action in my life had a value, a kind of score. It wasn't something I saw with my eyes. After all, I wasn't even sure if I still had eyes in that state. It was more of an understanding that came out of nowhere, as if someone had turned on a light inside my mind. Good deeds, moments of kindness and compassion, seemed to increase this score. I remembered when I donated blood for the first time, even though I was terribly afraid of needles. Boom. Positive points. I saw the time I stayed late at the office to help a colleague finish an important project, sacrificing my own plans. More points. Even small gestures like smiling at a stranger on the street or holding the door for someone all counted. But the reverse was also true, and that realization was a little painful. Negative actions, moments of selfishness or cruelty, lowered the score. I remembered when I gossiped about a coworker, spreading a rumor that I didn't know if it was true. Negative points. Or when I ignored my mom's calls for days because I was too busy with work. More points lost. Every small, selfish action, every unkind word, every moment of indifference to the suffering of others, all weighed in the balance. The most fascinating thing is that there did not seem to be an external judge. There was no one telling me what was right or wrong. It was as if I was judging my actions myself, based on a deep knowledge I didn't even know I had. It was as if, free from the limitations of my body and my conscious mind, I could see the true nature of each action, its purest essence. And it wasn't just the big actions that counted. Every little choice, every thought, every intention, everything seemed to have a weight. It was as if the universe was paying attention to every detail of my life, not to judge me, but to help me grow and evolve. I started to see patterns in my life that I had never noticed before. I realized that I often acted out of fear or insecurity rather than love or compassion. I saw moments where I could have made a difference in someone's life, but I chose not to get involved. And I also saw moments of great courage and kindness, moments when I did the right thing even when it was difficult. One memory in particular stood out. It was a rainy day in Charleston, and I was rushing to get to work, late for an important meeting. I saw an elderly woman struggling with a broken umbrella, clearly confused and distressed. For a moment I hesitated. I was late, after all, but something inside me made me stop. I helped the lady, bought her a new umbrella from a nearby store, and accompanied her to her house. I arrived an hour late for the meeting and missed an important business opportunity. At the time, I was frustrated with myself for being silly. But now, seeing this memory, I realized that that small act of kindness was worth much more than any business. Most surprising of all is that there was no final score. It wasn't like I was being judged to determine whether I went to heaven or hell. It was more like feedback, a reflection of who I was and the choices I had made. And then, suddenly, I understood. This point system was not about reward or punishment. It was about growth. Every action, every choice, was an opportunity to learn, to evolve, to become a better version of myself. I realized that many of my negative actions came from a place of pain or fear. When I hurt someone, it was usually because I was hurting myself. When I was selfish, it was often because I was afraid of not having enough. This understanding did not justify my wrong actions, but it helped me understand them, and more importantly, see how I could do better in the future. I stayed there, immersed in this understanding for what seemed like an infinite amount of time. It was as if I was seeing the entire tapestry of my life, each thread representing an action, a thought, a choice. Some strands were shiny and beautiful, others were dark and tangled, but together they formed a single complex pattern that was me. And little by little I started to feel a change. The darkness around me began to dissipate, and a soft light began to emerge in the distance. It was as if, having seen and understood my life from a new perspective, I was ready for the next step in my journey. As the light grew, I felt a mix of emotions. There was gratitude for the opportunity to see my life in such a clear and honest way. There was regret for all the times I failed to be the best version of myself. But most of all, there was a renewed determination. If I had the chance to go back, to live again, I would do it differently. I would do better. And it was with that thought that I turned toward the light, ready for whatever came next. The encounter with the light. The light began as a tiny dot on the horizon of darkness. It was so small that at first I thought it was just my imagination. But little by little, it grew, expanded, like the slowest and most beautiful sunrise you can imagine. It was not a blinding or aggressive light. It was soft, welcoming, like the glow of thousands of candles. As it got closer, I began to feel something I had never experienced before. It was a feeling of peace so deep, so complete it almost hurt. It was as if every cell of my being was being bathed in pure love and acceptance. I wanted to go towards that light. Every fiber of my being longed for her. It was as if she was calling me, inviting me in. But when I tried to move toward him, I realized I couldn't. Something held me, as if there were invisible chains holding me in place. It was then that I understood. What held me back were my own resentments, my fears, my sorrows. All the times I felt wronged, all the times I held a grudge, all the times I refused to forgive, all of it was holding me back. I saw flashes of moments from my life. The time I got into a fight with my best friend in high school over a boy and I never really forgave her. the resentment I held towards my father for missing my graduation because of a business meeting, the anger I felt toward a driver who almost hit me once, and how I wished something bad would happen to him. Every one of those resentments, every unresolved hurt, every little bit of anger that I had held on to now felt like a huge weight pulling me down, keeping me from reaching that wonderful light. And at that moment, I knew what I needed to do. I started to let go, to forgive. I forgave my parents for not being perfect, for making mistakes, for being human. I forgave my friends for letting me down at times, understanding that they too were doing the best they could with what they had. I forgave my exes for breaking my heart, recognizing that the pain helped me grow and prepared me for the true love I found with Carter. I forgave that driver who almost hit me, understanding that he was probably having a rough day and wasn't acting out of malice. I forgave my best friend from high school, realizing how foolish it was to have let a boy ruin our friendship. And, hardest of all, I forgave myself. I forgave myself for all the times I was too hard on myself, for all the opportunities I passed up out of fear, for all the times I wasn't the best version of myself. I forgave myself for being human, for making mistakes, for still learning and growing. As I forgave, I felt the invisible chains loosening. It was as if each act of forgiveness released a huge weight from my being, and the light got closer, brighter, until finally, in a moment of total liberation, I found myself enveloped by her, and it was indescribable. Imagine the most welcoming hug you have ever received. Now multiply that feeling by 1,000. It was as if I was being embraced by the universe itself. All fear, all doubt, all insecurity just disappeared. In that light, I felt complete, loved unconditionally, accept exactly how I was with all my flaws and imperfections. It was like coming home after a long journey, a home that I didn't even know existed, but that was always there, waiting for me. And then, in the middle of that light, I saw a figure. It wasn't really a person, it was more like a presence, a pure energy that radiated love and wisdom. And somehow I knew I was about to receive an important message, a message that would change the course of my life forever. As I approached this presence, I felt a mixture of awe and familiarity. It was like I was meeting an old friend who knew everything about me, but at the same time, it was something much bigger and wiser than I could ever comprehend. And it was like this, bathed in this light of unconditional love and faced with this enigmatic presence, that I prepared myself for the next chapter of my journey. A journey that, I was beginning to realize, went far beyond my little life in Charleston. A journey that connected me to something much bigger, something I was barely beginning to understand. The being of light and his guidance. At that moment, surrounded by the purest light I have ever seen, I found myself in front of a being that I cannot completely describe with words. It had no defined shape, it was more like a concentration of brilliant energy. But somehow, I knew I was facing a presence of immense wisdom and love. The being did not speak, at least not as we speak. It was more like his thoughts flowed directly into my mind, and the first thought I received was a name. Oriel. I don't know why, but I felt like that was his name, or at least, the name I should use to refer to him. Oriel started showing me things. It was like we were traveling together, not physically, but on a level of consciousness I had never experienced before. He showed me the universe, the stars, the planets. I saw galaxies spinning in a cosmic dance. I saw the birth and death of suns. It was breathtaking. So he focused on Earth. I saw our blue planet slowly rotating in space, so beautiful and fragile. I could see the intricate web of life that covers the planet, every living thing connected in some way to every other. And then, Oriel focused on me. I saw my life from a completely new perspective. I saw how every action I had ever taken had created ripples, influencing not only my life, but the lives of countless other people. Oriel began to show me visions of what seemed to be the future. It was like watching a movie, but I could feel every emotion, every sensation. I found myself in situations that hadn't happened yet, facing challenges that seemed enormous. One date in particular stood out, August 28, 2024. Oriel didn't tell me exactly what would happen on that day, but she made it clear that it would be a pivotal moment. "This will be a day of great change," he told me, using no actual words but delivering the message directly to my mind. "A time when critical decisions will need to be made, and where your choices will determine the course of your life and those around you." I saw flashes of that day. I found myself standing at a crossroads, literal and metaphorical. There was a sense of urgency, of importance, as if the fate of the world depended on my choices at that moment. It was scary and exciting at the same time. Oriel also told me about cosmic energies that would be at play during this period. He mentioned something about Mercury retrograde, a term I had heard before but never given much thought to. He explained to me that it would be a time of confusion in communication, a period in which it would be easy to make wrong decisions if I wasn't paying attention. On this day, Oriel told me, astrological and numerological energies will align in a unique way. The number 8, which represents power and material abundance, will meet with the number 7, which symbolizes introspection and spiritual growth. This will be a time to balance the material with the spiritual, to make decisions that will affect not only your life, but the lives of many others. The visions continued to flow. I found myself studying books on astrology and numerology, something I had never been interested in before. I found myself meditating, searching for answers within myself. I found myself helping other people, sharing what I had learned. But not everything Oriel showed me was clear. Many of the visions were hazy, full of symbolism that I couldn't fully understand. It was like trying to read a book in a language I only partially knew. Oriel warned me about the challenges I would face. "The path will not be easy," he told me. "There will be moments of doubt, of fear, of despair. But always remember, you are never alone. We are always with you, guiding and protecting." He told me about the importance of trusting my intuition, of listening to the inner voice that we often ignore in our everyday lives. "You're going to have to make difficult choices," he said. "Choices that others may not understand. But trust your heart, Eve. It knows the way." One thing has become clear. The future is not fixed. Oriel showed me different possibilities, different paths my life could take depending on my choices. It was both liberating and terrifying to realize how much power I had over my own destiny. When the visions finally stopped, I felt exhausted but also different, as if he had grown years in a matter of minutes. I knew I had been given a gift, but also a great responsibility, and I was determined to honor that no matter what. Oriel had one last message for me. "Remember, Eve," he said, his presence beginning to fade. "You are stronger than you know. You have an important purpose in this world. Don't be afraid to shine your light." And with those words, Oriel disappeared, leaving me alone in the light again. But I didn't really feel alone. I felt connected to something bigger, something that went beyond myself and everything I knew, visions of the future. As I floated there, surrounded by the warm, comforting light, the visions Oriel had shown me began to play out again in my mind, like a slow-motion movie. Each scene was vivid and full of detail, as if I were actually there, living those moments. I found myself in a dark room lit only by the soft light of candles. I was sitting in a meditative position, my eyes closed, my breathing calm and regular. In the air around me, astrological symbols and numbers floated like holograms. I seemed to be in deep concentration, as if I was deciphering a cosmic message. The scene changed, and suddenly I was in a packed auditorium. I was on stage, speaking to a crowd of people who were listening attentively. My voice was steady and confident, and I spoke about near-death experiences, about the nature of reality, about the power we have to shape our own destiny. I saw faces in the audience, some skeptical, others amazed, but all deeply touched by what I was saying. Another vision showed me on a deserted beach at dawn. I walked on the sand, leaving footprints that were soon erased by the gentle waves. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and I could feel a deep peace emanating from me. I realized I was pregnant, my hand gently stroking my rounded belly. I felt a wave of love so intense it almost took my breath away. The next vision was darker. I found myself in an office surrounded by papers and books. I looked tired with deep dark circles under my eyes. In front of me was a calendar, and the date August 28, 2024 was circled in red. I felt a wave of anxiety and fear, as if something terrible was about to happen. But then, the scene changed again. I was in a lush garden, full of colorful flowers and leafy trees. I wasn't alone. Next to me was a man I didn't recognize, but who somehow knew he was important to me. We were both smiling, our hands intertwined. I felt a sense of peace and contentment, as if I had finally found my place in the world. The visions continued to flow, each one more intriguing than the last. I found myself traveling to distant places, meeting people from different cultures, learning and teaching. I saw myself writing a book, my hands flying over the keyboard as I shared my story with the world. One vision in particular stuck in my mind. I was standing on top of a mountain, the wind ruffling my hair. Below me, I could see an entire city. Suddenly, a tremor shook the earth and I saw buildings begin to collapse. But instead of panic, I felt a strange calm. I raised my hands, and to my surprise, I saw waves of blue energy emanating from them. As this energy spread throughout the city, the tremors subsided and people seemed to calm down. I was, in some way, protecting the city. This vision left me perplexed. What kind of power was this? Was it literal or symbolic? I didn't know, but I felt it was important. The last vision I had was perhaps the most significant. I saw myself older, with silver strands in my hair and expression lines around my eyes. I was sitting in a rocking chair on a porch, looking out at a glorious sunset. All around me were children playing and adults talking. I realized it was my family, people I hadn't met yet, but who would one day be an important part of my life. What impressed me most about this vision was the feeling of accomplishment that emanated from me. I could feel that I had lived a full life, that I had made a difference in the world. There was peace in my eyes, a peace that comes from knowing you have fulfilled your purpose. When the visions finally stopped, I lay there, floating in the light, trying to process everything I had seen. It was too much to take in at once, and I knew it would take time to fully understand the meaning of it all. But one thing was certain: my life would never be the same. I had been given a glimpse of possibilities that went far beyond what I had ever imagined for myself. And with that glimpse came enormous responsibility. I knew that if I had the chance to return, I would have to make difficult choices. I would have to step out of my comfort zone, face my fears, and embrace a destiny that was bigger than myself. The idea was scary, but also exciting. And it was with this mix of fear and expectation that I prepared myself for what would come next. Whatever it was. I was ready to embrace my destiny, whatever it was. The meeting with Carter. While I was still trying to process everything Oriel had shown me, something incredible happened. Suddenly I saw Carter there, next to me. It wasn't the Carter I knew, with his physical body. It was more like the essence of him. Your soul, if I can call it that. My heart raced, or at least that was the feeling I had. I ran towards him, or rather, my consciousness moved towards his. I tried to hug him, but it was like trying to hug the wind. Still, I could feel his presence, his love, in a more intense way than I had ever felt before. "Carter," I screamed in my mind. "Are you okay? What happened? Can we go back together?" He smiled. That smile that always made my heart melt. But there was a sadness in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Eve," he said, his voice echoing in my mind. "My love, my life, you don't know how good it is to see you." There was so much love in his voice, so much tenderness, that I felt like my heart was going to explode. But there was something else too. a note of finality that filled me with fear. "Carter," I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on? Why can't we touch each other?" He sighed, a sound that seemed to contain all the sadness in the world. "Eve, my time here is up. I can't go back with you." I felt as if all the air had been knocked out of my lungs. No, this couldn't be happening. We had just gotten married, we had so many plans, so many dreams. "No, Carter," I begged, "please don't leave me. I can't do this without you." He came closer, and even though we couldn't physically touch, I felt like he was hugging me. The warmth of your love enveloped me, comforting me even in the midst of overwhelming pain. "You're stronger than you think, Eve," he said. "You have an important purpose to fulfill, and I will always be with you, even if you can't see me." Tears that weren't really tears ran down my face that wasn't really a face. The pain of loss was overwhelming, but at the same time I could feel the truth in Carter's words. There was something I needed to do, something important. "How can I go on without you?" I asked. "Remember everything we've experienced together," he replied. "Remember our love. Use it as strength to move forward. You still have a lot to do, a lot to live for." We stayed there, in that ethereal embrace, for a time that seemed infinite, and at the same time very short. I could feel his love surrounding me, comforting me. It was as if every moment we had shared together was being relived simultaneously. Our first date at school, our first kiss, our silly fights and our passionate reconciliations. The pain of separation when we went to different colleges and the joy of reuniting years later. The moment he asked me to marry him, the tears of happiness at our wedding. Our honeymoon in Hawaii, the plans we made for the future. Every memory was a treasure, every moment a precious jewel that I would forever hold in my heart. "I love you, Eve," he said finally. "I will always love you, but now it's time for you to come back. There are people who need you there." "I love you too, Carter," I replied, my voice cracking with emotion. "I will always love you. How can I say goodbye?" "It's not goodbye," he said softly. "It's just to see you later. One day when your mission is accomplished, we will meet again. Until then, know that I will always be by your side, guiding and protecting you." And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Carter began to fade away. I tried to hold him, begged him to stay, but it was useless. Little by little, he disappeared into the light, until all that was left was the memory of his smile and the certainty of his love. I stood there alone again, feeling a mixture of pain and gratitude. Pain for the loss, gratitude for having had the chance to say goodbye, and in the midst of it all, a growing determination. Carter was right. I had a purpose to fulfill, and I would do it, for him, for myself, for everyone I could help. With one last look at where Carter had been, I turned toward the light. I was ready to go back, ready to face whatever fate had in store for me. The return. After Carter said goodbye, I felt a change. The light around me began to pulse as if it were alive. And then suddenly, I felt like I was being pulled back. It was like falling from a very high place, but instead of fear, I felt a strange peace. The light became more and more intense until it became almost blinding. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything went dark again. But this time, the darkness was different. I could feel my body again. I could feel pain. The first thing I noticed was the smell, the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital. Then I heard the sounds, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the distant murmur of voices. Slowly, with an effort that seemed superhuman, I opened my eyes. The fluorescent overhead light was blinding, and I blinked several times trying to adjust. I was lying in a hospital bed surrounded by beeping machines. My entire body hurt, and I felt incredibly weak. I tried moving my fingers, and was relieved to see that I could. So I tried to lift my head, but a wave of nausea quickly made me give up. A nurse entered the room, and, when she noticed that I was awake, her eyes widened in surprise. "Doctor, she's awake," she screamed, running out of the room. Moments later, a middle-aged doctor with gray hair hurriedly walked in. He took my chart and started checking my vitals. "Welcome back, Mrs. Prescott," said the doctor, his voice gentle but with a note of surprise. "You gave us quite a scare. We even thought we had lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. The nurse, noticing my discomfort, offered me some water through a straw. I drank it greedily, feeling the cool liquid soothe my parched throat. "Carter?" I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse and weak. "Where's Carter?" The silence that followed was deafening. The doctor and nurse exchanged looks, and I knew before they even said anything. Carter hadn't survived. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Prescott," the doctor said softly. "We did everything we could, but his injuries were very serious." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. Even though I said goodbye to Carter on that other plane, hearing confirmation of his death in the physical world was devastating. I felt tears start to run down my face. The doctor continued talking, explaining to me about my own injuries, about the time I had been in a coma, about the long recovery process that I had ahead of me. But I barely listened. My mind was filled with memories of Carter, of our life together, of the plans we had made for the future. The next few hours passed in a blur. Exams, more doctors, endless questions. I responded mechanically, my mind still processing everything that had happened. The loss of Carter, the experience with Oriel, the visions of the future. Everything seemed like a distant dream, but at the same time, more real than anything I had ever experienced. My parents arrived, their faces a mix of relief and concern. My mother cried when she saw me, holding my hand as if she feared I would disappear if she let go. My father, ever the strong, silent one, had tears in his eyes as he stroked my hair. When I was finally alone, I allowed the tears to come freely. I cried for Carter, for the future we had planned together that would now never happen. I cried for the physical pain I felt, for the challenges I knew would lie ahead. I cried for everything I had seen and experienced during my near-death experience, for the responsibility that now weighed on my shoulders. But through the tears I felt something else, a growing determination. I remembered Oriel's words, the visions she had shown me. I had survived for a reason. He had a purpose to fulfill. I looked out the hospital window, watching the sun set over Charleston. The world outside continued to spin, oblivious to the transformation that had taken place inside me. And I knew, with a certainty that I couldn't explain, that nothing would be the same as before. The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. Physical recovery was slow and painful. I had to relearn basic things like walking and using my hands. Every move was a struggle, every small victory a celebration. The doctors were surprised by my recovery. "It's almost a miracle," I heard one of them say when he thought I was asleep. I smiled to myself, thinking about how shocked they would be if they knew the truth. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain. The loss of Carter left a void in me that seemed impossible to fill. There were times when I would wake up in the middle of the night expecting to find him by my side, only to be hit again by the cruel reality of his absence. However, in the midst of the pain, I began to feel something else. An urgency, a call that I couldn't ignore. The visions Oriel had shown me, the guidance she had given me, all of it echoed in my mind constantly. As soon as I was released from the hospital, I dove headfirst into studying astrology and numerology. I bought books, watched videos online, participated in discussion forums. At first, much of what I read seemed strange, almost absurd. But little by little, I began to see patterns, to understand connections that had previously escaped me. I learned about the cycles of the planets, about the influence of the stars on our lives. I began to understand what Oriel meant about Mercury retrograde and its influence on communication and decisions. I studied numerology, fascinated by the way numbers seemed to contain secret codes about our lives and our destiny. But it wasn't just about learning facts and theories. It was about connecting with something bigger, something that went beyond the physical world we know. I began meditating daily, seeking that sense of peace I had experienced during my near-death experience. As I delved deeper into these studies, I began to notice changes in myself. I became more aware of the energies around me, more in tune with my own intuition. I began to have vivid dreams, some of which seemed to contain messages or warnings. And then, about a month after the accident, I had a dream that changed everything. In it, I found myself standing in front of a large group of people. I was speaking out, sharing my story, helping others find meaning in their own lives. When I woke up, I knew what I needed to do. I started writing. First, just for myself, as a way to process everything that had happened. But I soon realized that my story could help other people. I started sharing small snippets online, in forums and support groups. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the world wrote to me, telling me how my experience had touched their lives, how it had given them hope in difficult times. Many shared their own near-death experiences, and I marveled at the similarities in our stories. I began giving talks in small groups, sharing what I had learned about the afterlife, about the nature of reality, about the power we have to shape our own destiny. At first I was nervous, worried that people would think I was crazy, but to my surprise, I found a receptive audience eager for more, and so little by little I began to find my way. It wasn't the path I had planned, it certainly wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it was the path that was before me, and I was determined to follow it with courage and purpose, the first steps of a new journey. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I felt like I was becoming a different person. The Eve who had gotten into that car with Carter that fateful night was no more. In her place was a stronger, wiser woman with a clear purpose. My life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. My career as an architect had been left behind, replaced by a mission that seemed much greater. I now spent my days studying, writing, and speaking about the afterlife, expanded consciousness, and the power of the human mind. I started traveling, speaking at conferences about near-death experiences and spirituality. At first, it was scary to be in front of so many people, sharing such a personal and, for many, unbelievable story. But every time I saw the light of recognition in the eyes of someone in the audience, every time I received a hug from a tearful person who said I had changed their life, I knew I was on the right path. My parents didn't fully understand what I was doing. They cared, of course. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown after Carter's death. But over time, seeing how passionate I was about my new purpose, how I seemed more alive than ever, they began to accept it. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain of losing Carter was almost unbearable, days when I questioned everything I had experienced, wondering if it had just been an elaborate dream created by a traumatized brain. But then, I remembered the feeling of absolute peace I had experienced, the unconditional love I had felt, and I knew, deep in my heart, that it had been real. As I approached August 28, 2024, the date Oriel had mentioned, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. What would happen that day? What crucial decisions would I have to make? I began to prepare myself, both physically and spiritually. I increased my meditation sessions, seeking clarity and guidance. I studied astrology and numerology even more deeply, trying to decipher the cosmic patterns that Oriel had mentioned. And then, one quiet night, about a week before the fateful date, I had another vivid dream. In it, I saw myself again in that brilliant light, and I heard Oriel's voice. "Remember, Eve," he said, "the future is not written, it is fixed. What you have seen are possibilities, not certainties. Your choices, your actions, can change the course of destiny. Trust yourself. Trust the love that you carry in your heart. This is your true power." I woke up with those words echoing in my mind, feeling a new wave of determination. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it. Today, as I get ready for bed, I look at the calendar on the wall. The date of August 28th, 2024 seems to shine, reminding me of what is to come. I don't know exactly what that day will bring, but I know I'll be ready to face it, with the lessons I've learned, with Carter's love in my heart, and with Oriel's guidance guiding my steps. I'm ready for whatever the future holds. And so I end this story, not as an end, but as the beginning of something new. My journey is just beginning, and I can't wait to see where it takes me. I know there will be challenges ahead. I know there will be moments of doubt and fear, but I also know that I have a strength within me that I never knew existed. Carter may no longer be physically by my side, but I feel his presence with me every step of the way. And with your love guiding me, with the lessons I learned during my near-death experience, I am ready to embrace my destiny, whatever it may be. Because now I know, death is not the end. It's just the beginning of a new journey. And I intend to live every moment of this life to the fullest, honoring the second chance I was given, and doing everything I can to bring a little more light into this world. This is my story, a story of loss and rebirth, of pain and hope. And I hope that, in some way, it can touch your life too, reminding you that there is more to this world than what we can see with our eyes. There is magic, there is mystery, and there is a purpose for each of us. And who knows, maybe one day when your own journey comes to an end, you too will see that shining light. And when that happens, remember, don't be afraid. It's just the beginning of a new adventure.